You know, it does my heart good to see the fight over spending. I want to welcome Elon Musk to the battle. I seem to recall at one point he was backing Obama. Wasn't he, Mr. Producer? I'm just trying to remember. Something like that. But he's come full circle, and that's a good thing. We need him. But we need more than him. 2015 in a book called Plunder and Deceit. I wrote this book. George Mason University economics professor Dr. Walter Williams rightly describes the underlying pathology driving the nation to economic and financial ruin as a moral problem. Many of you got this book. We've been an immoral people demanding that Congress forcibly use one American to serve the purposes of another, Walt Williams, the late, great Walter Williams, a dear friend. He was my first guest on my first Life, Liberty, and Levin on the inaugural show. First one. Deficits and runaway national debt are merely symptoms of the real problem, he said. As Williams states, nearly 75% of today's federal spending can be described as Congress taking the earnings of one American to give to another through the thousands of handout programs such as farm subsidies, business bailouts, and welfare. And some of the people today leading the battle over this continuing resolution to kill it support ethanol, which is a subsidy. And I don't want to take calls on this. I don't want to hear from people who are subsidized, from various corn growers and so forth, and I'm somebody who loves corn. Dr. Thomas Sowell, senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, Stanford University, at least then, remember this was 2015, notes that there was a time when the purpose of taxes was to pay the inevitable costs of government. To the political left, however, taxes have long been seen as a way to redistribute income and finance other social experiments based on a liberal ideology. But it's not just to the left, it's Republicans too. The consequences for the rising generation, as I called, and future generations of the statist's immoral, politically expedient, and economically ruinous behavior and policies are unambiguous, as evidenced by statistic after statistic, which are mainly ignored, discounted, or excused by most of the media, academia, and, of course, governing statists. Now, I'm going to tell you why almost everybody in this debate is a phony. Even many in the Freedom Caucus. Why many in this debate are phonies. They're fighting over discretionary spending, which is a good fight to have, but it's also a small percentage of the budget now. A significant majority of the budget goes towards so-called entitlements. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and other entitlements. Now, many of you might be shocked. You, like I, have spent a lifetime paying into Social Security and Medicare. I'm 67 now. I received Medicare. I didn't even want to receive Medicare. I wanted to keep my private health care. Medicare said that's against the law. And the private health insurer said, we're not allowed to, whether we could or not. So we won't. After contributing all the money I've contributed to Medicare, Mr. Producer, I didn't want to be a part of it, and I was forced to. Shocking. I don't want to be a part of Social Security, but I'm forced to. God knows how much money I've poured into Social Security. I don't want to be a part of it, but I will receive some back. And here's the thing. Nobody in the executive branch, nobody to my mind in the legislative branch, nobody beating their chests, pounding the drums, patting themselves on the back of the heads as real budget cutters want to touch Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, children's health insurance program, and so forth. Nobody. Nobody. And yet they're going bankrupt. The trustees for Medicare and Social Security have told us they're going broke. Now, right now. And nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody. But I'll talk about it. All the tough guys out there want to fight over what are really essentially crumbs This is make and break. As I wrote back then, Social Security and the federal government's health care programs, Medicare, Medicaid, Children's Health Insurance Program, and subsidies related to Obamacare will double in relative costs over the next several decades. Again, 2015, I wrote this. The past 40 years have together consumed an average of 7% of the GDP. However, they're expected to increase to 14% by 2039. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid account for 60% of the government non-interest expenditures in recent years. It's more than that now, closer to 70%. For example, in 1970, social programs accounted for 32% of total expenditures. Social programs grew to 44% of federal expenditures in 1980 and 1990, 54% in 2000. They were promoted as safety net programs for the protection of the poor and the elderly and the vulnerable. But in each case, the programs have snowballed and have become unsustainable. The Congressional Budget Office, CBO, expects their spending percentages to continue increasing indefinitely. Although this topic will be addressed, and I say more fully in another chapter, suffice it to say, the Social Security benefit cost explosion has been predicted for decades. There are currently 58 million people receiving Social Security benefits, probably closer to 78 million today. By 2024, that number will grow to 77 million. There I was, close. 2039, there will be 103 million eligible beneficiaries. Average benefits are on the rise, as is the number of people qualified to receive benefits. And they want illegal aliens to receive benefits on top of everything else. Over the next 10 years, there will be a 38% increase in the number of people over 65 years of age and entitled to receive Social Security benefits. By 2039, CBO reports, there will be an 82% increase in the number of those who are over 65 years of age. We have a growing elderly population. Increases will be caused in significant part by the influx of retirees and beneficiaries and the outstretched benefits promised by these programs, particularly with the huge expansion of federal health care spending. These are my words. I wrote this, 2015, and it was a very lonely time, Mr. Producer. I didn't hear anybody join in. Nobody. In fact, I keep hearing people running for office saying, we're not going to touch Social Security and Medicare. Well, then you're not serious about the debt. Because now's the time to touch it by grandfathering in those who receive it, grandfathering in everybody who's 55 and older, and then anybody who's younger than 55, adjusting the system, modifying it so they have something when they're done, rather than redistribution of wealth. But no, we can't discuss it. I'll discuss it. Over the next 10 years alone, I wrote, again in 2015, the percentage of people reaching retirement age will grow from the current 14% to 21%. That's exactly what's happened. Concurrently, the number of income-producing individuals will drop from 60% to 54% of the population. CBO projects the trend to continue as life expectancy increases. So I would ask my fellow talk show hosts, seriously, on radio, I would ask the hosts on television to ask the most conservative among our House and Senate representatives, to ask Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, to ask them all, what are you going to do about the entitlements? Are you going to do anything about the entitlements? Because they take up nearly more than 3/4 of our budget. What are you going to do about it? They can go tweet right now. We'll be happy to read it, won't we, Mr. Producer? The federal spending on health care increase is massive. On Medicare, on Medicaid, the Children's Health Program, subsidies for Obamacare. They're massive. You haven't heard a single person talk about it. Not one. Again, in 2015, I wrote, the GAO and CBO understate the true nature of the economic and financial calamity facing the nation. This debate they're having on the CR, you have to understand, this is peanuts. I don't mind the debate. It's important. But it's also a shiny object. It's peanuts. On February 25, 2015, Boston University professor of economics, Dr. Lawrence Kotlikoff, testified before the Senate Budget Committee about America's fiscal insolvency, and I quote him, and its generational consequences. I talked about this 5-6 years ago. He flatly stated that our country is broke. It's not broke in 75 years or 50 years or 25 or 10 years. It's broke today. Indeed, it may well be in worse fiscal shape than any developed country. He condemned Congress for cooking the books. He said Congress's economically arbitrary decisions as to what to put on and what to keep off the books have not been innocent. He said successive Congresses, whether dominated by Republicans or Democrats, have spent the post-war accumulating massive net fiscal obligations, virtually all of which have been kept off the books. He explained that the real debt picture is far worse than the federal government admits. Again, this is 9 years ago. He said the U.S. fiscal gap currently stands at $210 trillion, and that would exceed $300 trillion today. Unimaginable. The size of the U.S. fiscal gap, $210 trillion, he wrote 9 years ago, is massive. It's 16 times larger than the official U.S. debt statement, which indicates precisely how useless official debt is for understanding our nature's true fiscal position. In 2013, the fiscal gap stood at $205 trillion. In 2014, it was $210 trillion. Hence, the country's true 2014 deficit 10 years ago, the increase in its fiscal gap was $5 trillion, not $583 billion, and it's only gotten much, much, much worse. It's over $300 trillion right now. Do you hear a single member of Congress talking about this? No, not one. All the tough guys and tough gals, not one. Professor Kotlikoff concluded, what should be obvious to all, U.S. post-war generational policy is accurately characterized as take as you go. Over the decades, Republican and Democrat Congresses and administrations have taken ever larger amounts of resources from young workers and transformed them to older workers. The resources taken from the young, given to the old, it's called taxes. The late Dr. Edward Gramlich, former Federal Reserve Board governor, explained that for workers to become more productive, investments must be made in education and training and all the rest. He said when the government spends more money than it has, it borrows the rest. Most of the money borrowed comes from private savings. And he went on to warn that we cannot ignore the consequences of deficits much longer. Again, this is 10 years ago. They will lead to a stagnant long-term economy that will not only be unable to support Social Security and Medicare and other social programs, but will not be able to provide opportunity for today's youth who will be paying the bills. That's the real situation. Even the most outspoken so-called fiscal hawks. You don't hear this stuff from Rand Paul. He likes to consider himself the real libertarian, the real fiscal watchdog. He's a mouse. We need a lion. He's a mouse. We need a lion. This has been known for decades. We've been ringing the bell behind this microphone for decades. Decades. And yet we hear crickets. Crickets. So they'll fight over the continuing resolution. That's good. That's a start. But it's a tiny fraction of a percentage of what's at stake. They know it. I know it. And now you know it.